Human, 2023. Who are we?
Well, hello and welcome. We are so delighted to have you here for our final lunchtime of Human. And if you haven't got a sandwich, there are more on their way. We have the wonderful problem of running out of food. So stay here and we will get a sandwich to you. Thank you for joining us. If this is your first event that you come to this week, you are especially welcome. And today we are looking at investigating the infinite. Has science disproved the supernatural? And we have Emma speaking for us. Emma, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, nice to be with you all. I'm Emma. I was back in the day a Baronatsky at Emma and graduated a few years ago. And now I work with a Christian charity which helps students think through some of these big questions about life and faith and science. So yeah, stuff like this is what I get to do for a job.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to hand over to Emma in a minute. A few things just before we start. If you need the loo, there are some at the back there, or there's actually one through this door here. And feel free to leave at any point if you have supervisions, or they might all be cancelled. But yeah, feel free to come and go and get some more food if it appears at any point. But I'm going to hand straight over to Emma. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. I want to apologise if I'm very static today. I managed to hurt my back just sitting on a chair in Pret just now. I feel like I'm 25 going on 65, but if I look very wooden, that is why. Wouldn't you like to believe in magic? There's something appealing about the supernatural, isn't there? The books and films and TV we love are full of it, whether that's the Harry Potter you grew up on, or Stranger Things, or Rings of Power, or Marvel movies. We love a good story with some magic in it. And in the real world, belief in the supernatural has seen a bit of a resurgence in the past few years, hasn't it? I don't know about you, but my TikTok is full of stuff like manifesting and tarot cards and horoscopes. Maybe you've heard about or been involved in the Cambridge Uni Witch Society, which started a couple of years ago. There's something about the supernatural which draws us in, isn't there? Now, some of you here might be quite into all of that stuff. Others probably think that, as a Cambridge student, there's no way you believe in all that spiritual rubbish. But even if you're skeptical about the supernatural, don't you have to admit there's something a bit appealing about it? Wouldn't it be kind of nice if you could manifest yourself a first, or put a hex on your ex? Over Christmas, my husband and I watched the classic Christmas movie Miracle on 34th Street. In the film, a mysterious bearded old man called Kris Kringle takes a job as Santa Claus in the New York department store Macy's. It's not long before you begin to suspect that Kris Kringle is in fact the real Santa Claus. Now, one of the main characters is a little girl called Susan, and Susan has been brought up to never believe in fairy stories, and especially not in Santa Claus. Now, through the film, you get to watch her slowly beginning to melt and start to believe in the magic of Santa. It's very heartwarming. It's a lovely movie. But ultimately, though, I thought at the end, the film felt like a bit of a letdown. The moral of the story, it seemed, was that you should believe in Santa. But of course, when we come back to the real world, there's no escaping the fact that Santa just doesn't exist. It's a nice enough story, but it doesn't offer us anything real. And perhaps that's your objection as you look at Christian faith. The supernatural stuff, Jesus' miracles, Noah's Ark, that kind of thing. It makes a nice fairy tale for kids. You might even be a bit attracted to the Bible's teaching that God is love, or that we should forgive each other. But what self-respecting adult and what self-respecting Cambridge student could possibly hang their philosophy for life on a religious text which includes, among other things, angels, people walking on water, a talking donkey, and right at the heart, a guy who's been dead for 2 days coming back to life? If you've been around some of the human events so far this week, perhaps this is the thing that's holding you back from wanting to know more about the God we've been talking about. Maybe you say, I'm okay with believing in the kind of distant God who maybe got stuff started at the Big Bang but then left us to it. But a God who intervenes in history, isn't that a step too far? Surely science has proved that miracles aren't possible. That was certainly the opinion of the philosopher David Hume. He wrote in a famous essay on miracles, "A miracle is a violation of the laws of nature. The proof against a miracle is as entire as any argument from experience can possibly be imagined." No claim about a supernatural event is to be believed, according to Hume, because the argument against it from our normal experience is just too strong. Now, even Christians have sometimes been embarrassed by all this spooky supernatural stuff. At various points in history, people have tried to create a version of Christianity which kept all the nice bits about loving your neighbour and all that, but cut out all the supernatural things about Jesus being the Son of God or rising from the dead. People figured just no one in the modern world could possibly believe in all that, so it's better to just chop it out. But were they right? Can no thinking person today believe in the supernatural? Well, the thing is, there are an awful lot of very intelligent people who do believe in all this stuff. People with PhDs and professorships in STEM and humanities subjects. Earlier in the week, we heard from Cecilia Brassett, Professor of Anatomy at the university, about her Christian faith. Other prominent Cambridge Christians include the evolutionary biologist Simon Conway Morris, or Peter Robinson in computer science, who was part of the team who invented the webcam. If science has disproved the supernatural, how is it that smart, scientifically literate people like these can believe in something as outrageous as the resurrection of Jesus? So which is it? Has science disproved the supernatural, or hasn't it? Well, I actually think if we're asking that, we're asking the wrong question. And I know that's ironic, given that's the title of the event you've come to today. But I think it's the wrong question because it misunderstands what science is. Here's how the Encyclopedia Britannica defines science. Science is any system of knowledge that is concerned with the physical world and its phenomena, and that entails unbiased observations and systematic experimentation. The definition of science deliberately excludes the supernatural. Science's remit covers the physical world only. So to get answers on whether it's rational to believe in the supernatural, we actually need to turn not to science, but to philosophy. Now, I want you to imagine this box contains the physical universe. There are two basic ways of understanding the universe, according to philosophy. Now, the first way of understanding the universe is as a closed box. This is a view you might call naturalism or materialism. Inside the box is the physical universe, and the physical universe is all there is. Everything that happens is just the effect of atoms randomly bumping into one another inside the box. Nothing enters the box, nothing leaves the box. Now, the second way of understanding reality still includes the physical universe inside the box, but starts to consider what might be outside of the box. You might call this view supernaturalism. Here, we in this room represent the supernatural layer to reality that is outside the box. Now, you'll notice if I want to, I'd be able to open the box to put something in or to take something out. Or I could just leave it alone to get on with its own thing if I wanted to. The important point is that the system is no longer closed. Now, here's the question. Is there something outside the box of our physical universe? Is everything that happens just atoms bouncing around in an endless chain of cause and effect? Or is there something more going on? Now, here are, I think, two good reasons to think there might be something outside of the box. First of all, consider the fact that our physical universe had a beginning. Space-time itself had a starting point 13 billion years ago at the Big Bang, or at least that's our present understanding of physics. Now that shows that the physical universe is not self-existent. You couldn't have brought yourself into being, you had to have a cause, your parents. Now similarly, if the physical universe has a beginning, it must rely on something else to have caused that beginning. And that's a pretty good reason to suspect there must be something outside the box of the physical universe. A second reason to think there's something outside the box is reason itself, reason and morality. Every day, your mind makes thousands of rational and moral judgments, from the mundane, this jumper is yellow, to the major, the war in Ukraine is wrong. If the box is all there is, our rational and moral thoughts are merely a product of the system. Here's what biologist J.B.S. Haldane wrote explaining the consequences of that idea. If my mental processes are determined wholly by the motions of atoms in my brain, I have no reason to suppose that my beliefs are true, and hence I have no reason for supposing my brain to be composed of atoms. Do you see how that ties us in real knots if we view the world that way? If the system of nature is all there is, we can't look at the universe from any kind of objective viewpoint. Our thoughts are just a recent development in this cause and effect system of atoms knocking into one another. You make no free decisions. You are just cause and effect. But if there's something outside the box, things are different. If reason and morality can transcend the system, and we here just get to tap into them, then maybe our thoughts actually mean something. Now, hopefully we're getting to see that there is a decent case for saying there is something outside of the box of nature. Now, if there is something outside, say God, it follows that he, she, or it might be able to intervene in our physical reality. Maybe supernatural events aren't off the table after all. Besides, we all already believe in at least 3 miracles. I guarantee that everyone in this room already believes that something came from nothing, that life arose from things that were previously not alive, and that consciousness came from things that were not conscious before. What's a few more minor miracles next to those big ones? I guess that some of you are thinking, hang on, but what about the laws of nature? Didn't Hume say that miracles violate the laws of nature? That's got to make them impossible, right? Now, if that's you, your objection isn't a new one. People thousands of years ago, when the Bible was being written, knew how the laws of nature worked. Sometimes we think that people back in the day believed in miracles just because they were stupid, but just because they hadn't mathematically codified the laws of nature yet. It doesn't mean they didn't know that you have to have sex to get pregnant, and dead people don't just come back to life. We all get how the laws of nature work. An object in motion will continue in motion unless acted on by a force. That's Newton's first law. If A, then B, provided that nothing else intervenes. And that's the key bit. Laws will tell you what will happen in a situation, provided that nothing else intervenes. But they won't tell you what happens in circumstances where some outside force does intervene. For example, say I have 2 £5 notes in my purse. The laws of mathematics will tell you that 5 plus 5 equals 10. I have £10 in my purse. But if someone has gone in there and nicked my cash, I will have £0 in my purse. And that's not a violation of the law of maths, is it? It's a sign that something else has happened. So do the laws of nature disprove supernatural events? Well, I don't think they do. Our increasing scientific knowledge can't give us any more knowledge on whether at one specific point in history God intervened to make something unusual happen. All our advances in science over the years have actually made miracles no easier or harder to accept. Now that means that the existence of a God outside the physical universe, who occasionally intervenes in the world in supernatural ways, is totally plausible alongside our understanding of science. The existence of the supernatural actually makes more sense of things like the beginning of the universe and our ability to think. It makes sense, I think, to say there might be something outside the box of our physical universe. But there's an awful lot of competing claims, aren't there, about what that thing is. You've got all the major world religions, for a start. Or what about different forms of non-religious spirituality? Manifesting, mindfulness, modern witchcraft. All of these claim to let you connect with something beyond the physical universe. But what is that thing we're connecting with? It makes sense to want to know, right? We don't just want to abandon our rational thoughts when it comes to thinking about the supernatural. I think David Hume is actually totally right to be skeptical about most supernatural claims. The likelihood is most of them are just made up. But if it's possible there is something outside the box, how do we know what that thing is? You could say that it's impossible for us to know, and so we should just treat all spiritualities as equally true. Of course, they can't all be true because they make such conflicting claims about what's out there. Is it one God, many gods, some kind of impersonal force? But if we can't know what's out there, then we might as well treat them all as equally valid. But there is one way we can know for sure what's outside the universe. Take our box again. Imagine that I could shrink myself down and climb inside the box. I'd be able to show people what is outside the box. That's me. I guess people might not believe me at first, so I'd probably want to go around inside doing and saying some things that only someone from outside the box could possibly know or do. That would be helpful, wouldn't it, if we wanted to know what's outside the box of our physical universe? Well, that's just what God has done. The God outside the universe shrunk himself down, climbed into our world, and showed up on our planet as a man called Jesus of Nazareth. He travelled around Judea, the eastern corner of the Roman Empire where he was born, telling people about the God outside the universe. Now, we have that all recorded in 4 different eyewitness accounts of his life, known as the 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There's a bunch of copies of those free on your tables and at the back. And if you've never read one of these, can I encourage you to take one away and give it a read? They're quite short. It'll only take you an hour or 2, but it could totally change your life. Now, if you do read one, you'll see that to demonstrate that he really was who he said he was, Jesus did some pretty crazy things. He knew what people were thinking before they spoke. He took a couple of piddly bread rolls and some sardines and turned it into enough food to feed 5,000 people. He walked on water. He healed people of all kinds of diseases. He even brought people back to life, as we saw yesterday if you were here. But Jesus' miracles aren't just about doing cool tricks to prove that he's God. Jesus' actions show us what God is like. And as you'll see if you open up one of these accounts of his life, Jesus' miracles point us to the existence of a God who is good and generous, a God who knows us entirely, a God who has power over the physical universe, a God who hates evil and injustice. But there's one more thing Jesus shows us about God that I think is really shocking. I want to take you to one more example of a miracle that Jesus performed. If you're here on Wednesday, this might be familiar, but we're going to take a look at it again. Now, this story starts with Jesus in his hometown, preaching to a crowded room of people. Word has been spreading that Jesus can heal people, and so the sick and the injured are gathering in, trying to get close to him. Now, one of these people is a guy who's paralyzed, maybe because of a spinal injury, we don't know. He can't walk, so he has to get his friends to carry him in on a stretcher. And when they reach the house where Jesus is, it's so crammed full of people that they can't even get in the door. In the end, they decide they're going to climb up on the flat roof, break a hole through the ceiling, and lower this guy down from the roof. As you can imagine, everyone is pretty confused as bits of plaster start falling from the ceiling, and eventually this whole stretcher with a man lying on it gets lowered down. Now here's what happens when the stretcher lands at Jesus' feet. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralyzed man, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Is that what you were expecting Jesus to say? Surely, if Jesus can heal this guy of his paralysis, he should heal him. And later on, Jesus does go on to heal him. What's surprising is Jesus' priority here. His first thought is not the man's need for healing, but the man's need for forgiveness. Forgiveness is a relational thing, isn't it? Forgiving someone restores you to being in a good relationship with that person. Jesus' number 1 priority is restoring this man into a good relationship with God. And here's the shocking thing that shows us. God actually wants a relationship with human beings. If God hates evil and injustice, he should not want anything to do with humans. It would make sense for God to steer well clear of our little planet. But the incredible news of the Bible is that the transcendent God wants to have a meaningful relationship with finite, teeny-weeny biological beings like you and me. We started this lunchtime thinking about how there's a little bit inside all of us that would like to believe in magic. The stories about the supernatural that we love so much ultimately let us down, don't they? Because they present us with a kind of magic that captures our hearts and our imaginations so that we long for it to be true. But you turn off the TV, you close the book, and the magic is gone. But what if there is a kind of magic that we can believe in that's better than Harry Potter, better than Santa Claus? What if, beyond the box of our physical universe, there is a supernatural God who wants to have a relationship with us? Wouldn't that be quite something? Now, as we close out these lunchtime talks this week, here's what I want to leave you with. If it's even possibly true that God stepped into our universe in pursuit of a relationship with you and me, that is a potentially world-changing claim. The worst thing you could do today is walk out of this room thinking that Jesus is kind of interesting, but not really worth any of your time after this week. The one thing Jesus cannot be is moderately interesting. Either Christianity is total nonsense and dangerous nonsense at that, or it's true. And if it's true, it's totally life-changing. Now, for some in the room, you've only just started thinking about these things. Maybe this is the first Christian Union event that you've been to. If that's you, I'm so glad that you're here. Now, even if you think it's really unlikely that this Jesus stuff is legit, if the stakes are this high, it's got to be worth a further look, doesn't it? If you conclude that none of it's true, you haven't lost anything. But if it is true, there's everything to gain. Logically, it just adds up that Jesus is worth investigating. And the good news is this. If Jesus was a real human in real history, he is investigatable. You'll hear in a minute about loads of options for how you can continue investigating Jesus beyond this week. But why not take away one of these accounts of Jesus' life and give it a read? Or come along to the search, which you'll hear more about later. Or come back this evening as we explore the biggest miracle of all, Jesus' resurrection. But I also suspect there are some among us here who've been thinking about these things for a while. And my challenge to you, if you're beginning to understand that God wants a relationship with you, is this. How long are you going to leave him on red? Today could be the day that you enter that relationship. If that might be you, come chat to me afterwards. Chat to a Christian friend on your table. But for now, we're going to have a bit of time where you guys can discuss this for yourselves. So there'll be some questions on the screen. And maybe you can talk with people next to you. Which of those categories would you identify yourself in? Are you new to all this? If that's you, maybe you want to answer these questions. If you were to investigate Jesus more, what questions would you want answers to? And then what might be a next step you could take to get some answers? There'll be people on your table with some good suggestions if you don't know. Alternatively, if you've been thinking about Christian things for a while, is there anything holding you back from entering that relationship with God? Alternatively, if you're already sold on Jesus, how has having that relationship with God made a difference to your life? We'll have a few minutes to chat. You can also use that QR code there to send in questions to the pigeonhole. We'll try and put the link up too in case the QR code doesn't work. And then we'll come back to some Q&A in just a few moments.
Great. Well, we've got some amazing questions in the pigeonhole. So I'm just going to quiz Emma on as many of those as we can get through before we run out of time. And I'll go in popularity order. So if there are some good questions, then make sure to be upvoting them. So, top question we have is, you mentioned that if all this is true, it's life-changing. How is it life-changing?
This is such a good question that could have such a long answer. This is going to throw it back at you guys. I think the best way to answer this question, how is it life-changing, is to, after we finished, turn to a Christian who sat near you and be like, how has this changed your life? Because actually, knowing Jesus is going to have transformed different people's lives in different ways. I think for me, the big ways that our relationship with God is life-changing is about hope for the future. Thinking what's going to happen to this world in the future, what is going to happen to me when I die. Actually, the hope of getting to spend eternity with God, that changes the way I see all of life. Other ways I think this has been life-changing for me is knowing that my identity most deeply is not in my achievements, not in my relationships. It's in the fact that God knows me and loves me and has chosen me to be his. And again, that totally shapes my outlook on life, I think. But ask the person next to you, because my story is only one story and they're going to have some great stories out there in this room.
Wonderful. Next question is fantastic. If a miracle explains the beginning of the universe, how do we explain the beginning of God, or the fact that he has no beginning?
Yeah, great question. I think the way I want to answer it is that everything that has a beginning has to have a cause. That's like some big philosophy for you. But if you don't have a beginning, you don't have to have a cause. And if you think, if everything that has a beginning has a cause, if you keep tracking that back, either you go infinitely to that goes back infinitely, there of causes, or you have to have something that is the first thing that doesn't have a beginning, that is self-existent, that can then cause all of the other things. If you don't believe in God, maybe you'd say the universe is the self-existent thing out of which everything else comes, but the universe has a beginning. So how can the universe be the first self-existent thing? I actually think it makes loads of sense, whether it's a Christian God or not that you believe in, to think actually there's got to be something before the universe that caused it. God is a pretty good candidate for that. Sorry if I didn't answer that very clearly.
No, it's great. And if we don't get through them all, do come chat to Emma afterwards. Next question we have is, I think the Bible is not meant to be read literally like a history textbook. There are way too many miracles in there. So why not just read it metaphorically, like a fiction story with a moral?
Great question. And as I was saying, that's been such an attractive thing, I think, for Christians down the centuries. Loads of people have taken this approach to the Bible. It's like, oh, I feel like I can't believe this and I can't believe this, so let's just read it metaphorically. A couple of things I think I want to say to that. One would be, if there is a God who is actually worth believing in, like, wouldn't you expect him to do some things that defied our expectations? I don't think I want to believe in a God who can't break the laws of nature if he wants to, or doesn't have any power over the physical universe. That God is a bit lame, and I'm not sure I'd want to believe in a God who can't do supernatural stuff. Second thing I'd want to say is that I think with any text, I'm a scientist, really not a humanities student, but I think a responsible way to read any text is just think, how does this want to be read? Like, what genre is this presenting itself as? Sure, it would be really bad for me to take a Charles Dickens novel and say, I'm going to read this like a science textbook because I've decided that's the genre that it is. I actually have to read the book and be like, oh no, this is a novel, that's how I'm going to read it. I think as we look at the Bible, we have to ask, what genre is this presenting itself as? Certainly, if you look at the Gospels, the way Luke opens his is saying, I've really carefully investigated everything so that you can know that these things truly did happen. He's not presenting it like a novel, he's presenting it like history. And so I want to honour the way that the authors write the Bible in the way that I read it.
Wonderful. And I'll take this opportunity to flag up the bookstall at the back as well, because we think these questions are really, really important. They're all free for you to take and to investigate for yourself. And one of those is the book, Is Jesus History? The life of Jesus isn't something we can investigate in the same way we might do a science experiment. Whereas John Dixon is a historian, and he goes into, is Jesus a real person? What evidence do we have for that? Is there any evidence for the gospel text that Emma was talking about? So do check that out if that is your question. The next one we have is, Emma, you talked about how being a Christian gives you a hope. This person has asked, how can we place hope in something we can never know for certain?
It's an interesting phrase, for certain, isn't it? You don't know for certain that the chair you're sitting on is not just going to collapse under you, and yet you hoped when you sat on it, it wasn't going to do that. I think as humans, certain knowledge is not something we have. We don't know everything that's going on in the universe all the time. In all of our ordinary decisions, whether it's to trust someone enough to go on a date with them, or to sit on a chair, or anything we do in life, we base on our hope and our plans for the future on knowledge that's pretty firm, we can be really confident in, but it's not certain, is it? And so, yeah, I think I'd be really wary of having a bar when it comes to things about God or the supernatural, that you just don't put that bar in place for anything else in your life. If you're happy in the rest of life with 99.9% certainty, but when you say it comes to things of God, it has to be 100%. Well, of course, that's never going to be attainable. So yeah, I just encourage you to apply your normal sense of, is this true, is this trustworthy, to things about Jesus as well.
Great. And following on from that, coming back to the box analogy, if Jesus entered the box before, why isn't he still here now to show us?
Ooh, yeah, good question. Lots of things that I could say. I think we do have the record of Jesus' life here to show us about. It's not that Jesus came once, but now we can't possibly know God because we weren't alive at the time. Actually, I think he was pretty deliberate in making sure that the records got left so that we could know him and know who Jesus is. The other reason I'm really glad that Jesus is not here on earth anymore is because he had a job to do. And part of that was coming to earth to show who God is, to die in the place of rubbish people like you and me, to rise again to new life, and then to go back to be with God, so that he can then put his plan in place to make the whole world new again. And if Jesus was still here, he could never go back to heaven to then enact that plan to remake the whole world. So I'm pretty glad that Jesus isn't here right now, because it means that perfect renewal is coming sooner. But we're also really glad that we have a record of Jesus' life, so we can know what he's like, know what God is like.
Great. How can we understand things from science that conflict the accounts in the Bible, e.g. creation versus evolution?
Oh, this is such a big question. I love talking about it. And if this is really your question, feel free to come chat afterwards, and I'd love to talk about your specific questions about this in more depth. I think when it comes to evolution, I want to go back to some first principles, kind of that we were mentioning earlier. Why does anything exist at all? Why is it that we can even think about evolution? I think as you answer some of those questions about science, you have to do it in that context of why is it that we're able to do science at all? I think that fits definitely most comfortably in a Christian worldview of a God who made an ordered and rational universe, gave us access to that rationality to explore it. So I think you've got to keep that in your head as you're asking those kind of questions. Then when it comes to actually how do you hold the Bible together and evolution, I did Bionatsky. I'm pretty comfortable holding those things together. I think for something to have been created for a purpose and the mechanism of creation, those things are slightly different and can come together. I certainly think God can have used evolution in the way that he made the world, and that's cool with me. Other Christians disagree. But if you have specific questions, come chat to me afterwards.
Wonderful. I think we may have to make this our last question. And I think the next one is, what if we believe this stuff in our heads but find ourselves often doubting whether it's actually true? How do we deal with doubt?
Yeah, thanks for such an honest question. I've been there a lot of times, often. It's so easy, isn't it, to be like, I have this view of the world in my head that I do believe it's true, but actually my heart doesn't feel it all the time, and I think that's not surprising. I reckon the same is true. If you find yourself here as an atheist or a Hindu or whatever, you probably also have those same kind of doubts. We're humans, having doubts in ourselves is part of being human, I think. Something that I find a real comfort in those seasons of oh gosh, but what if it's all true? Is the fact that if you're a Christian, you're not basing your belief just on something one person said one time, actually the historical evidence for the existence of Jesus, for his resurrection, for his miracles, for the way that he has transformed the world since the start of the church. That's really solid. We've got some solid historical ground to stand on. And yeah, that question flips back on the alternatives. Do the alternatives to Christian faith have solid ground to stand on? Does your atheism, or the atheism you might be drawn to as an alternative, does that have kind of solid historical grounding, solid intellectual grounding to stand on? So that might be my advice. Like, doubt's okay, it's normal, we all experience it. But do doubt your doubt, test the other options and think, does this actually have anything to stand on? What about Christianity? Sorry, that was a bit all over the place.
No, that's wonderful. And thank you so much, Emma, for speaking to us. Why don't we show our appreciation for Emma now? Yeah, and I'm sorry if we didn't get to answer your questions. Don't let them go unanswered. Come find Emma, talk to people on your tables. If you take anything from this event, it's that we don't want this to be the end of a conversation, but we think these things are really worth looking into. A couple more books that might be helpful. A great one is Can Science Explain Everything? We have lots of copies of that on the bookstall, so do check it out. It's written by John Lennox, who was a mathematician and scientist at Cambridge and Oxford. So yeah, go see what credibility is there. If I'm a scientist, can I even engage with these questions? Or perhaps you're just interested in the person of Jesus himself. You want to hear more about the stories Emma was telling. You can find the story of the paralyzed man in this one, Luke's Gospel, the Cambridge edition, in fact. Why not just read it and see what you make of it? Does it sound like history, or is it just fictional? We want you to investigate this for yourself, which is why we love doing these events. And another thing we'd love is to know how we can make it better. If you hated your sandwich or loved your sandwich, stick it on the form. If you'd like to get in contact with someone to hear more about stuff like this, put it all on the form. The QR code is massive today so that it works. So yeah, please do let us know how you found the event. We'd really love to hear from you. And do come back tonight. We have international dinner about plan and providence and where is the purpose in my life. And that's over Chinese food, and there may even be free bubble tea. And then in the evening, we'll be back in here thinking about finite, and I can't remember what the actual title is. It might come back to me, but come back. There'll be home-baked desserts. If you've been before, you know it's really worth joining us. So we'd love to see you there. Thank you so much for coming.